Good evening. Benvinguts tots, benvingudes a l'auditori de la Facultat de Comunicació i Relacions Internacionals de Blanquerna de la Universitat Ramon Llull. Soc la Judit Colell, soc la vicedegana d'Empresa i Sostenibilitat, a part d'altres coses. I avui tinc el gran honor de tenir aquí a la nostra facultat el director Wenders, que crec que no cal que el presenti, perquè tots sabem qui és. Per mi ha estat un gran honor. Ahir va ser un regal, realment ja ho he dit, un regal poder donar-li el premi del Barcelona Film Fest, al qual els agraïm també que hagin volgut organitzar aquest acte juntament amb nosaltres. Ja ho vaig dir i crec que ho comparteixo amb molts dels que esteu aquí. Wenders ha estat un referent per tots nosaltres. Des de les seves primeres pel·lícules, jo ahir anomenava Alicia en las ciudades, anomenava... ara se m'ha anat al cap. Però també en París, Texas, amb El cielo sobre Berlín i amb documentals també, com deia, no és només un director magnífic de ficció i a més totalment en actiu. Aquest any té dues pel·lícules a Cannes, una a concurs i una altra a Cannes Premiers, i realment com a director de documentals també ha estat sempre un referent amb Pina o La sal de la tierra. Vull dir que realment té una palma d'or de Cannes, té premis a Berlín, a Venècia, a tots els festivals més importants del món, i estem molt, molt, molt honorats de tenir-lo aquí avui. Moltes gràcies, senyor Wenders, mestre. Ara veurem un petit vídeo que explicarà molt millor que jo la seva filmografia. Well, lovely way to start this chat. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing your
your thoughts on your work.
Should I translate into Spanish?
I think we're okay.
Okay.
They are all sorted. Thank you. Well, yesterday, and particularly at the opening gala of the Barcelona Film Fest, when I saw you come on stage and receive the award, and also thinking about the wonderful opportunity we have to, in some cases, discover or rediscover your work on the big screen, part of your work, of your extensive filmography. I was thinking that whenever I see one of your films, whenever we've had the chance to chat at different film festivals for interviews, and when I hear you talk about your work, your career, and cinema culture, the work of others as well, I think of some words come to mind, like generosity, curiosity, love, and a lot of energy. Beyond the dance floor, as we discovered yesterday. So to start with the first question, I would like to sort of kind of thread this beautiful poster of the retrospective and of the Barcelona Film Fest with very contemporary news and your latest film, because Paris, Texas won the Palme d'Or in Cannes, and you're going back this year. You've been selected for the official selection competition. It's always difficult to speak of competition, I guess, when it's art. How does it feel to be going back to Cannes? And I don't know if you can tell us anything about, because you have a filming competition and then a documentary as well in Cannes Special. So here's my first question.
Buenas. So, you can hear me. I was pretty young when I first went to Cannes. It was in 1975. And the film was called In the Course of Time. I don't know what the Spanish title was.
Yeah, no.
Kings of the Road was the English title. But anyway, it's a long time ago. It was 1975, so it's 48 years ago or something. And I've been there quite often ever since. So you should say I should be experienced, in the words of Jimi Hendrix. But experience is overrated in every regard. So actually, I'm a little nervous, not only to go back, but to show two films. Showing one film can be nerve-wracking. Showing two can be very soothing, or can be the opposite. I don't know. Nobody knows anything about these two films. We didn't show them to anybody. The Cannes Festival saw them. No journalist knows them. Nobody knows them. Which is a great feeling, so far. When they all know them, it'll be different. So I'm not going to tell you about them.
How about the experience of going? Well, you said that, but that no experience is overrated. But what memory comes to mind when you think of the Palme d'Or win, for example, of that night?
That night was glorious. We knew we would win something because we were invited to stay. And only those films who get something are invited to stay. We had no idea what we're going to win. And then you see all the other people who get an award, and they're sitting always at the inside. So all the directors or actors or actresses, they're placed so that they can go up and go in front. So you see, all these people are sitting on the outside. So who's first? Because first they have the awards that are great, but not as great as the Palme d'Or. You have the actress and writer. And so each time they call up somebody, you're happy that it's not your name, because it means you move on. And in the end, there were just two guys left. and on the other side was John Huston. And I was sitting here. And we looked at each other, and John and I sort of said, I crossed my fingers for you, and then they called me, and I looked at John, and John said, I don't understand, why am I here? Because after the Palme d'Or, he got the award for his lifetime. So that's why he was there. But for a long time, we thought maybe we get it together. Maybe one of us. And then they all only called my name. And I first looked at John Huston. Sorry, John, but it's me. And then I was really so happy when he got the Golden Palm afterwards for his lifetime. And we had a lot of laughs afterwards behind the stage. And we asked each other if we wanted to swap. But I insisted to keep mine.
This is a perfect transition to the question I was going to ask next, which is to do with your love of American cinema and how you looked at the American landscape and used some of its most significant iconography landscapes from your own perspective, having grown up as a European filmmaker, as a German filmmaker. So what fascinated you, or what did you learn from sort of the work of masters such as John Huston or the American cinema, and what were your thoughts when you sort of decided to make the leap and go and shoot your stories there?
Deciding to shoot a film in the American West was a decision I took together with Sam Shepard. We wanted to write a film together, and that was the first thing. We wanted to do it together. We didn't know which story. We had no idea. And for a couple of days, we told each other lots of stories that interested us. And then we realized most of these stories took place in the West. And then Sam said, well, we know one thing. If we write something together, it will take place in the West. Sam had just written a play called True West. And all his plays are basically in the American West. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Sam Shepard as a playwright, but he wrote a lot of plays on the American West. So we agreed, whatever we're going to write now, and whatever story we'll find will take place in the West. Eventually we found the first grain of the story, which was this man that you just saw before, Harry Dean Stanton, who shows up in the desert, catatonic, without language. And then we developed a story, at least some part of it. And before we finished the script, or before we were even close to finishing, I spent 2 months on my own in the West. And I drove along the American West for 2 months, day and night, and I knew every dust road. And I realized the main job for me was to forget all the American Westerns I had seen. I realized I could not make this film if I remember anything about John Ford or Howard Hawks or Anthony Mann or any of the great Western directors. I could only make a film on my own if I would start from scratch. So driving through the American West was the best way to wipe off all the memories of cinema and be confronted to the place itself. And I took lots of photographs in color, because I wanted it to be a color film, and the American West is where what Actachrome was invented for. Bright colors, primary colors. So when we made the film, Robbie, my cameraman, and I shook hands together and said, we will never ever think of any movie we've seen, and we will not make a single shot that reminds us of anything, neither John Ford nor anything. And in order to do so, we never made a storyboard, and we never even made any drawing, which I usually, up to that point, always made every night before the shoot. I make my little drawing so I know what I'm going to do the next day. In Paris, Texas, we never ever prepared the next day, and we came to the location and we walked around and we let the location tell us where to start. And that was, I think, a very good approach to the West. And as I said before, experience is overrated. Also the experience of other movies. It's better to expose yourself to a place and to the reality of your story. So that's how I approached it, by forgetting about everything I knew.
And somehow it's like the perfect landscape, in my view, of one of the themes that I think, well, correct me if you don't agree, but one of the themes that we can find in your filmography, or at least one that fascinates me, is this idea of characters in search of themselves, searchers, so to speak, and the knowledge, how we learn to live with ourselves and others. So I thought it works so well in these desolate, sort of desertic landscapes, and it works well in cities where we can feel pretty much the same loneliness. So how do you agree with that, or what's your approach when it comes to dealing with the deeper themes in your stories in relation to the landscape?
I'm not really making movies about themes. Themes I have in myself, but they're never the subject of a film. So I wouldn't make a film about somebody who searches. But without even realizing, Harry Dean Stanton in Paris, Texas became a man who searched for his entire life. He had lost it. He had lost not only language, but his wife and his kid, and he lost his sense of identity. He was nobody. So he was in search of something. But that wasn't what I considered was the subject of the film. I don't carry in me subjects that I want to turn into movies. I carry in me the desires for characters or for places, and the subject is something that has to come out of these characters. And the subject of search is the subject of my life. I wouldn't make a movie if I knew already what it wanted to say. Why would I make it if I knew already? And why would I tell it to anybody if I knew the answer? I feel people can only be interested in the searching process if the people who make the films are searching. If they're knowing, that's a whole different business. That's not what I'm in. I'm in the searching business and looking for answer, and I'm not in prepared answers around the subject. So Paris, Texas was very much a film about searching for identity and for love and for a meaning of life, but I was doing it and my character was doing it, and it was never sort of the theme. Sam Shepard and I never ever spoke one line about searching or identity or whatever. We spoke in terms of character.
So that's the kernel of how you work, the characters.
Yeah. Characters and not knowing the answer, but making a movie in order to find out the answer.
And in your experience, how would you compare your experience actually making films in the U.S. with previous generations of German filmmakers who had to sort of go to or look for refuge in Hollywood? I don't know, professionally and personally.
As I was born in post-war Germany, and as the history of German cinema before my time was a very dark time, I didn't really connect to the history of German cinema at all. When I discovered movies, it was French movies, American movies, Bergman, Truffaut, Hitchcock, all these people, I didn't care for German films. And it's only much later that I realized I had missed the chance. Well, I didn't have a father in German cinema, but I had grandfathers. One of them was Fritz Lang, and the other one was Murnau. They were grandfathers, and I discovered them later. I dedicated a film to Fritz Lang, and a character in a film of mine is called Frederick Monroe as a reference to Murnau. I discovered these grandfathers much later, and I was happy to have a connection to some sort of decent German film history, but it was a huge leap to overcome the blind age of 20 years in between.
You're also, not necessarily all filmmakers, I guess, are as passionate cinephiles. One would hope so, but your love for film is amazing, and you have explored in depth the work of several filmmakers. I would like you to elaborate a bit on that, maybe sort of talk about Nicholas Ray, your fascination for Ozu, the links with Antonioni, so such a different variety of filmmakers, and to me it's only a testament that of the curiosity I was referring to at the beginning, which I think is the key, in life probably.
Well, when I was discovering cinema, I was quite young. I lived in Paris and wanted to become a painter, and got sidetracked by the cheapest place to see movies, which was the Cinematheque. And I had a cold room and I had no money. Cinematheque was 1 franc a screen. So for 3 francs I could 3 movies, or even 4 if I stayed in between on the toilet. So, which was a good trick. And so I did see, while trying to become a painter, I did see more than 1,000 movies. And they completely detoured me. And they completely made me realize there was a bigger dream than becoming a painter. And I realized these movies had given me very much. And some of these movies that I admired so much were made by people who I actually was able to meet later. There was Nicholas Ray, who became a very good friend of mine, when we met in the course of making The American Friend, which was also released in Spain. It was the first of my films that was really released in Spain. And I met Sam Fuller, and we made actually 3 films together. I never met my big master, Yasujiro Ozu, because he died already in '62, and that was before I ever took movies seriously. But I made a film on his life and a little bit acknowledged always that he was the master for me if I had ever needed one, but unfortunately I only found out about him when I was already making 3 or 4 movies. So, but he still is who I consider my master, and he is still his cinema is still kind of holy for me and like the sanctuary of movies. So I had the chance to meet some of these filmmakers that I really admired and had given me a lot. I remember how often I'd seen Antonioni's Deserto Rosso or others of his films, and one day I was standing in front of him. It was in Cannes, and he actually appeared in a little film I made in Cannes called Room 666, where I interviewed all my colleagues about the future of cinema. And there was Antonioni in front of my camera, or Godard, and many others. And Michelangelo was so elaborate and so elegant and so smart, and really had the answer for the future of cinema. So some of them I had the chance to meet and be able to sort of give back a little bit what they had given me. In the case of Nicholas Ray, is that we made 2 films together when Nick was in very bad shape. That's a long story. So there's not only the history of movies, there's also the history of the people who make movies. And that's a whole different history. And if you get involved and if you see these fates and if you know how much they put into their films and how some of them really lived their entire lives for movies. Some of them were almost killing themselves. Kurosawa committed suicide, at least tried to commit suicide after the failure of one of his last films, because he took it so personally he couldn't live with the fact that the film was a failure. So some directors, and then he went to live and made 3 other movies. And I think we're all happy that his suicide failed. But some directors give their lives to make movies. Literally. And for a lot of them, like Truffaut, there was not even a difference between living and making movies. And you see that in American Night, for instance, in his film about filmmaking. So in my life too, I slowly didn't quite distinguish anymore between my love for movies and for the people who make them and for the process and for the privilege to remain a searcher while working on movies about searching. Yeah. Now I told you you're all right.
It was just a question earlier, but anyway, last time speaking about filmmaking and about humanity and the people who make movies, the last time I saw you was at the last edition of the Berlinale at a homage for Carlos Saura, and I was moved by the story you told us, and I thought it was maybe a moment, if we could devote a moment to sort of how you met Carlos Saura and what he meant for you. He was such a great filmmaker and such a fantastic human being.
Carlos was one of the greatest people I ever met and one of the friendliest. And whenever we would meet each other on airports or in festivals or in theaters, there was this big smile on his face and on mine too, and we gave each other a big hug, and we went back a long, long time. I was a very, very young man, a beginning filmmaker, and my second film, called La Letra Escarlata, was shot in Spain. I wanted to shoot it on the East Coast in America, but our budget did not allow for that. So we ended up shooting the film in a western village in La Mancha. And they painted the whole village black. Anyway, it turned out that I either had to make a film in Spain, where it was much cheaper than in America, or I couldn't make it at all. So I agreed on a Spanish co-production. And my little young company, Film Facultat Autoren, we made a deal with Elias Querejeta, some of you might know his name, and a co-production deal that they would co-produce my film La Letra Escarlata, and we would co-produce a Spanish film called La Muda. Habla Mudita. No, Habla Mudita. So, I traveled to Spain. This is 1972. This is in a very different age of Spanish history. I traveled to Spain in order to meet Carlos Saura because he had to agree on the deal. And I came to the airport in Madrid, and then I went into a car and drove for a long time, and finally came to a beautiful villa out somewhere in the boondocks, and there were cameras and lights all around, and the windows were closed, and I was told to wait, and I was curious. I went into the house and I watched Carlos Saura shoot with his wife then, with Geraldine. I will come up with the title of the film very soon. I just forgot it. I sometimes have. Anyway, they were shooting, and I watched them, and it was the first time I've ever in my life been on a real movie set of somebody else, with a big camera and lights, and actually I'd never been on anybody else's movie set. So eventually there was a lunch break, and Carlos interrupted, and then he saw me, and he said, "Oh, you are the German guy." And he gave me a hug already then. It was nobody. I was really literally nobody. I was somebody who wanted to go into a co-production with him. And he gave me a hug and showed me around the whole place. And then I had lunch with him and Geraldine under the trees on a big table with all the crew. And I thought, filmmaking is paradise. You sit on big tables with your crew, you have great, fantastic Spanish lunches with wine and everything. And then you go back to shooting. And at the end, he just said, of course, it's totally fine, let's do this. So I went home and I told my company, it's fine, we can do this. But we always remembered, both of us, of this first encounter because I was really 22 years old, 23 maybe. I just made The Goalkeeper's Fear of the Penalty, my first film. And Carlos was so welcoming, and for him it didn't make a difference if I was a world-renowned director or a first-time director. He liked me and he showed it, and ever since, whenever we met, we just expressed to each other how much we had the same idea about filmmaking and about life and the world. What is the title of the film he made in 1972? Two or three?
We'll check it out.
It came out in 73. Can anybody Google this?
Yeah. We'll look for it.
I had it on my... I knew it when I came in, but now it's gone. With Geraldine starring in it. Ana y los Lobos, exactly.
Thank you, Carlos.
Exactly. Yes. Ana y los Lobos, and I met Ana, but I didn't meet the wolves.
I also wanted to ask you, because you mentioned you wanted to be an artist, a painter. But then you still do. You know?
Have a chance, I think.
Yeah, but your love for for art, for all sorts of, for music, of course, architecture, literature. And when I think of painters like Edward Hopper, whose influence we can see in films like The End of Violence, but also the shoot you made for the exhibition, right? So could you talk to us a bit about how this passion for culture in a broad sense of the word has informed your work?
I think it has a lot to do with the fact that I grew up in post-war Germany in a very, very, very bleak place. I grew up in ruins, and there was nothing beautiful about anything. But if you're little, that's the world, and you think it's beautiful. So the most gorgeous things I remember from my childhood is the cheap paintings on the wall of my parents' apartment. There was Van Gogh's Sunflower in a very cheap print, and there was a Corinth painting and some French landscapes. Nothing big, just lousy prints, but I thought this was beauty. And I soon discovered that there were real things called paintings, and I saw them in my uncle's apartments and eventually even in a museum when my father took me, because he realized I was so interested in paintings. And then I thought there was nothing better in the world, because the world I lived in was nothing in comparison to these paintings, and that was sheer beauty. And then one day we went to Amsterdam, and I spent the entire day at the Rijksmuseum. And the next day my parents wanted to take me somewhere else. I said, no, let's go back. I want to go back to the right. 7 or 8.
7 or 8.
I just wanted to go back into the museum. I'm the only kid who wanted to take his parents to the museum. Normally it's the other way around. So I love painting, and I've learned so much from painting about seeing and about everything, framing, everything you need as a filmmaker. I really learned very early, before I even know there was cinema. I learned from painters, framing especially.
And when it comes to the formats, or like, you've done documentary, you've done, of course, fiction features, music videos. Your filmography is so extensive. When it comes to sort of getting involved in a new project, what are you looking for? What's the inner joy you get from work?
The biggest joy I get from the feeling that I don't know how to do it. If I get a feeling, oh, I can handle this, then I immediately lose interest. I need to have the feeling, the butterflies in the stomach, that I do not know how to do this. When I arrived in Havana, it was for the first time in my life in Havana, we started shooting the very day because Compay Segundo was going to leave in 2 days. We shot the very day I arrived in Havana. We shot in his apartment. I never met the man. I never met any of them. I had no idea I could possibly make a film about their music. What right do I have to make a film in Havana? So I didn't have the feeling I knew how to do it. I had the very distinct feeling, I can't do this. And that is a good condition to work. That's a great condition to work. It humbles you, but it also enables you to surpass yourself. So that was just one example. I'm in front of that situation quite often when I start a film. And if I know too well beforehand how to do it, I usually don't do it. Because there's so much more movies you can make in your life. I mean, in the beginning when I started, I thought I could do an endless amount of movies. And finally I realized there was a finite amount of movies. And now I realize there's only a handful of movies, maybe not, left. So you have to be very careful. And if you choose something that you know too much about and you know you can do it, you know how to do it, you know, and other people say you're the right person to do it, that's a bad sign. It's a very bad sign. Yeah, you laugh.
Well, we'll give
Yes.
chances to the audience to
So
ask
they don't
questions.
laugh
We have
anymore.
a couple of mics there, I think. Pilar and Farnés, get on to you in a sec. So they over here.
This is Pilar.
Pilar and Farnés.
So
they will help us.
they wander around with microphones.
So I think we have a first question over here.
Hello, Mr. Wenders. Thanks a lot for your movies. Maybe we'd like to see more. But I like to ask you, going back to the Lauf der Zeit, or King of the Road.
En el corso del tiempo.
En el curso del tiempo, there was some situation where the movies were finishing, or at least the theaters where the movies were shown were closing down. Many times has been said that the cinema is dying. After the video, it was Godard who said it. Is the cinema dying? Is it just changing? Will Go keep saying that the cinema is dying?
The cinema is probably never dying, but it changes shape and form and changes professions and changes the way you see it. Nobody would have foreseen 10 years ago that by now all of you see most of their films at home. Nobody. And nobody would have thought that eventually people would see films on their mobile phones or on their computers. Nobody would have ever thought so, because it was so much better to be in a movie theater. Why would anybody want to see the same thing in the palm of his or her hand? You got to be crazy. But we didn't foresee the avalanche that happened, the avalanche of digital information, the amount of things we are bombarded with. And nobody foresaw the pandemic and the fact that out of a sudden cinemas were going to be closed, and the alternative was so easy. Stay at home and watch movies, new ones. So that really advanced the deterioration of the theater as institution. And now theaters are fighting all over the world for survival, because a lot of the audience isn't coming back. They have other habits. A lot of young people today are so busy keeping up with everything that is produced today that if you tell them they should maybe know a couple of movies in the history of cinema, they say, "Are you crazy? We don't have time enough to catch everything that's happening now. Why should we look into the history of cinema?" And that is a different attitude, and nobody could really foresee that. I still think cinema will always have a future, but it will change. I hope that one day, I'm not wishing the worst to the streamers. I wish them well. But one day they'll collapse. How can they go on if they continue to produce more and more and more? They're going to have to collapse one day. It is inevitable. Whatever crisis will be, they have so many debts, they have more debts than the country of Spain. And they continue producing to cover these debts, so they have to produce more and more and more. Eventually the bubble will break, and then what are people going to watch? Where are they going to go? And imagine the young person who then discovers a place called cinema, and they sit down and have this overwhelming experience of seeing a movie for the first time on the big screen, surrounded by people, instead of being at home or on there. What an incredible experience that will be. So I believe that will happen one day. I believe that cinema has always survived that crisis. They were always very, very instrumental in the crisis of humanity. Cinema was instrumental in surviving them, and it will be instrumental again, because that crisis will come. That crisis that the streamers will just cannot continue. Whatever the crisis will be, an economic crisis or just an implosion. There's already so much stuff that's going to be produced. In my city of Berlin, I cannot hire any craftsperson. I cannot hire any camera assistant or set designer, because they're all working on a yearly basis for Netflix, everybody. I don't find anybody. They're not available. They're all working for Netflix or Amazon, and they're all happy because they have a steady income. They don't particularly like what they're doing. But independent movies is difficult to do today because the lack of people alone, because they're all gone. And that's the same in other professions. I wouldn't want to be a theater owner or a distributor these days. Their professions are getting lost. But one day we'll need them again. Hopefully.
Linking to the changes in the industry, I wanted to ask you about...
But let me say one thing.
Yeah.
You want to know what I think is the future of these streamers? That they discover the history of cinema. Because each of these streamers potentially is just as good as the Cinematheque in Paris when I was a young man. Potentially, you could see there the entire history of cinema, if they only wanted to. But they're into producing more and more new stuff instead of putting a brake on and also allowing the history of cinema to be known by people who could use it. Anybody who is very smart, who is running Netflix or Amazon, any of them, any very smart person would start buying the history of cinema, because then you have a future. I hope somebody picks it up.
So in connection with the changes, I wanted to ask you about the use of 3D, because there was a point where we thought everything, most films would be in 3D. You've experienced 3D, and you've taken a different approach to, for example, the approach Hollywood took towards this chance to explore this technology. So, would you do it again? What's your experience with? Was it rewarding? Too complicated? Or Does it have to do with the challenges you were talking about earlier, like, let's go into unknown territory?
We did go into unknown territory when we made Pina. Some of you saw Pina at the time in 3D.
Yeah.
In 3D, not so many maybe, but some of you.
I saw it in Berlin when
we made Pina before Avatar came out. People said, "You're fucking nuts. You make a movie in 3D, nobody can see it." And then, God bless James Cameron, he made Avatar, which I think was a great movie, I loved it. But what I loved most was that suddenly many theaters were able to play 3D. So when Pina was finished, there were hundreds of screens available. It was a miracle. We'd made the film like people telling us, nobody can see this. What do you want to do it on 3D? I believed in it because I saw the potential. And the potential I still see to this day. And after Pina, I made 4 movies in 3D. One of them is playing now in Cannes. Not talking much about it. It's also a documentary like Pina. Because I still believe in it as the most beautiful language the cinema ever developed. I think of 3D as what Lumiere brothers and anybody in the beginning of cinema had in mind. That's what I would have liked to invent. Films that take place in 3 dimensions. Actually, it was tried several times, very early in the 50s. And again now, and it was all there. But then the disaster happened. Basically, the American studio industry decided it was their tool. They owned it. They didn't think of it as a language. They thought of it as a means to earn more money.
Yeah.
You could charge extra. And they ruined what I consider a beautiful poetic language of cinema. They ruined it, and so that now there's a lot of people who would never consider going to see a movie which is in 3D because they know it's baloney. They know it has to be shitty. That's the image 3D has now in the minds of many people. Little do they know what this language is capable of. I showed it so far at least a couple of times. I think I showed it first with Pina, and I'll show it again with Ansem, and I hope you're going to have a chance to see it. So I think of it as something extraordinary. I think of it as a very intense way to see. You see much more in 3D than you ever see in 2D, because your brain uses huge portions that are turned off when you see a movie. When you see a movie that is flat in 2D, a lot of your brain isn't there. If you see it in 3D, you can prove that scientifically. It has been done. If you see it in 3D, huge areas of your brain are activated, and they provide a more intense experience. And you see much more on a screen than ever before. And that's why a lot of people are scared of 3D, because you also see mistakes. You see mistakes very big. Acting mistakes, makeup mistakes, directing mistakes. Mistakes are more obvious. So, but I can speak forever on 3D, but let's keep it there.
Right. More questions? One over here, and then there, and there. Okay.
Hi, I would like to ask, how rigorous are you when filming with the script? Like, how much do you stay true to the script and then film? I don't know if I explained myself correctly.
Yes.
Okay.
I know the feeling very well, so I can explain myself on that subject. I've made quite a number of films in my life without a script. Fictional films, not documentary. In El Corso del Tiempo, half a page of script and never more. Half a page. It was the opening scene. 2 men meet by the river. So, and I've made other movies without a script. And each time I made these movies, in the course of the movies, I had to work plots at night in order to always write it for the next day. In the course of the movies, I always said, never again will I make a film without a script. I'm mad to do this. And then I would do the next film with a script. And while I'm doing it, I find myself again sitting at night and rewriting it and thinking, no, I can do much better than this. Why did we write this? Confronted with my actors and the locations and the light, I know better now. So I rewrite it. And eventually I forget the script. And then I say, why did I want to make a movie without a script? It's much better without one. And I do the next one without. So as you can see, I'm torn. My favorite vision was always to have a writer that I liked to be with me on the set. That was also, I only did it twice in my life. It never worked more, and it was a beautiful experience that I didn't have to write the dialogue for the next day myself, but I could explain it, and then I could go to bed and it was written the next day. That was so beautiful. But it's not always possible that you have your writer with you and that you remain friends.
I think there's a question over there.
I won't tell you.
Hi.
I could, but only among ourselves.
Hi.
Off the record.
Thank you very much for sharing your vision, first of all, with the films. And I wanted to ask about this certain spirit as a goal and as a tool for saying so. That method might seem incompatible with some of the American production schemes, somewhat incompatible. Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. My question is, how was the experience of concealing that spirit with those schemes? And also, how did you find it when you went back afterward to Berlin, for example, like in '87, to do Wings of Desire? So that's a question. And also, if I might, if you could comment on the Stranger Than Paradise thing, that piece of film. I mean, I've heard that you participated on the birth of Stranger Than Paradise somehow, if that's correct. Okay, thank you.
Stranger Than Paradise is the easier story because it's simple and true. Jim Jarmusch was an assistant of Nicholas Ray's on the film we did together, Lightning Over Water. Jim was Nick's assistant, and when the film was finished, or maybe even during the shooting, one day Jim was in the office and he opened our refrigerator to get out a Coke. But that refrigerator was not the refrigerator with a Coke, but with a film stock. And he saw 4 boxes of 120 meters of black and white stock left over from the state of things. And Jim stared into that refrigerator as if he was frozen himself. And I saw him stand there and look at these reels of film. And I said, "Didn't you want to have a drink?" And he said, "No, Wim, what are you doing with this film? It's black and white." I said, "I know it's black and white. I didn't use it for a state of things." And then he said, "Can I have it?" I said, "Yeah." "What do you want to do?" He said, "I have a short film in mind." It became Stranger Than Paradise. He shot it exactly with that footage. We're still good friends. And whenever he opens my fridge, I make sure it's only got Coke in it. The other question was, how do I deal with American studios? Once in my life, I went there to make a movie. I was young. It was in 1978. I spent 4 years on making a studio movie called Hammett. Took 4 years of my life and 40 different versions of a script written by 4 writers. The movie almost killed me. In the end, it was not a film by me. It was not a film by the producer, Francis Ford Coppola. It was some film by somebody, but not us. And I realized never ever in my life was I going to do this. Never ever was I going to be involved in a production where I didn't control the money, where I didn't know what the money was used for and how much was on the screen, and I didn't know the limitations. I like to have limitations. I can make a movie if I have very little money, then I know I have to do it. If I have a little more, so much the better. But if you do not know what money you have, that sucks. And if you're not able to decide how you use it, that sucks more. And if you are not able to decide on your final cut, then your life is not worth it. So I never did it again. And I produced all my films ever since. And I'd rather do small movies than movies for huge sums, and I have been offered some, but I never thought it was worth my lifetime to be working as a hired director. Never anymore.
There's a question there, and then here,
Hi.
And then in the middle.
and then in the middle. Yeah.
Where are you?
No, you go ahead, over there on the right.
Ah,
Hi.
Yeah.
Hi. My name is Saulo. I'm from Brazil, Fortaleza. I am cineasta. I scribed the question. Sorry.
No,
The
excuse me.
translator here.
No.
Yeah.
Can you ask the question, please?
No,
Can you ask
it's
the question?
question here. You're read it, please.
okay.
But can you
do
read it out?
Oh, yeah.
But
Yeah, my question here.
It's translated.
it's
Why?
can you read
Is
it?
it Google
Okay.
Translator?
Yeah.
I hope it doesn't suck.
Yeah.
Why did you choose those life stories to be projected in the film Under the Sky of Berlin? Google isn't so good. Do you have any of those stories that are yours? What is your biggest conflict to make a movie? Thank you.
Okay.
So, I got it. The story of Cielo Sopra Berlino? So,
El cielo sobre
El Cielo Sopra Berlin is very simple. I had come back from America after 7 or 8 years in America, trying to do Hamlet, and then I did State of Things, half in between America and Europe, and I did Lightning Over Water with Nicholas Ray, but these were all not the films I wanted to make in America. I had gone to America as a young man, 1978, I was 33 years old. I had gone in America to make a great American movie, and I didn't. Hamlet was not the great American movie. Lightning Over Water was a very painful experience and a documentary. The State of Things was a small European film on a difference between Europe and America, but none of them was the film I had dreamt to make. So I felt I couldn't even go home because I had nothing to show for. I had gone to America to make the big American movie, and I didn't do it. I didn't have it in me. And then I realized that was the wrong dream to begin with. I would never make the big American movie because I wasn't an American filmmaker. I tried hard when I was doing Hamlet to become American director. I realized that wasn't me. I didn't have that person in me. I was a German romantic and a European filmmaker. I could never make an American movie. And when I realized that, I realized I could make a film in America. And I made Paris, Texas. And that was the film of a German romantic made in Texas. And that allowed me to come back. Finally, I could come back home. And when I was home, after a long absence, I was home in the city of Berlin, where I had always worked from, and I'd lived there since the early 70s. And I realized I didn't really know it anymore. I'd been in America so often, even my dreams were invaded by the English language. And I realized I was going to make a film about what it means to be a German and about the hour zero of Germany. I felt, let me go back to the beginning. And it would have to be a film in Berlin, because for me that is the soul of Germany. It's also the soul of everything that was evil about Germany. But it was the hour zero. And I decided I was going to make a movie in Berlin. It had to deal with everything that concerned my being a German. And it had to convey all my convictions about storytelling and about showing what I thought cinema was able to show, which was not just the visible world, but also an invisible world behind the world. I always thought so, but I'd never been able to show it. And then in Berlin, I came up with the idea of the angels. The idea was offered to me by the city. The city is full of angel statues. You cannot walk through Berlin without seeing an angel somewhere. And I realized, wow, the city is showing me something. I could maybe take these angels seriously. Maybe there was a character in there. I slowly tried to figure a story involving a guardian angel, and it eventually became Wings of Desire. The city had suggested it to me, and my German past and my willing to come to terms with being a German for the rest of my life and not wanting to be an American again or whatever, but just being a fucking German romantic was good enough for the rest of my life. So that's how I made Wings of Desire, without a script, by the way. We had scenes that were written, dialogue. Peter Handke wrote some beautiful dialogues for the film, but there was no script. He didn't know if I could use these dialogues because he didn't know what the context was. Well, I told him about the guardian angels, and he said, well, you have to handle that on your own. But here's a suggestion. If they have a long talk, these angels, maybe that's what they could say to each other. That was the first scene of the two angels sitting in the BMW. Was written by Peter on complete speculation that maybe you can use this. I don't know if you still want to make this movie. I don't know if you have changed your mind. But if you're still making a movie with angels, maybe you can use this dialogue. And that's how we slowly made the film, from one day to another, with a little help from some of my good friends. Some of them are angels.
This is great. A question here.
In the middle,
Third-
yes.
third
She's
row.
been raising her hand so
Yeah.
desperately.
Thank you. Because I am an editor and I work editing films, and for me, and I suppose for you, it's such an important moment. I would like to know for you what do you look for in an editor? I've seen you've worked with many, and
Not so many.
well, not so okay,
A
not
few.
so many.
Actually, it boils down to 2 or 3.
So for me, it's important to know what do you look for in there. What's necessary for you in an editor when you spend so many hours, and when your film it's cooked, no, in an editing room, and well, maybe how do you approach the editing moment?
I'm not a good cook myself, so I need a cook. And the thing is, I feel as a director, especially if you make a film without a script and if you so much pull it out of yourself, you shouldn't edit it. Because then you would just only revolve inside yourself. And I love the editing period. It's my favorite part of the whole filmmaking process. I like looking around and looking for locations, and I don't like shooting all that much. It's nerve-wracking. Truffaut once said, any director who tells me they like the shooting process is a liar. I don't know. Anyway, sometimes shooting is fun, but I'm happy when it's finished, and I'm very, very, very happy when I sit down in the editing room and I know the next 3 months, 6 months, maybe a year, sometimes 2 years, I will spend there in the company of somebody who soon will know every frame of the film better than I do. And that's the first thing I want the editor to do, to be familiar with every take and every outtake and every second that we shot. I think I know every second, but editors have a different memory, and sometimes they know that I've also did a take, a reverse angle that I forgot, and out of a sudden they pull it out of the whatever they pull it out of. So I really rely on editors because it's a whole different process. I like an editor to show me a scene the way he or she, lately I've been working more with women, the way she sees it. I like that. I like to see somebody just show me what she could do with the scene. And then I can also show her what I would do with the scene, because when I shot it, and then we compare. And most of the time, out of comparing different visions, you come up with a third that is better than either any of them. And sometimes you come up with a fourth and fifth. Editing is a slow process. It's slow cooking. As you mentioned, the image of cooking, it's slow cooking. Editing is, you're not doing French fries. It's a slow process, and if you're patient, you can be surprised to find the real movie inside the material, the real film that you dreamt of, but you have to give it time to show up. It has to surprise you sometimes, it has to surprise the editor sometimes, and it's a long process, and sometimes because you're not happy with something, or she's not happy with something, and then you realize there must be something wrong, even if I think it's perfect. And then we try something else, and out of a sudden I realize, wow, who'd have thunk it? There is something that I wanted to show, and it shows up in a different way than I thought. Editing is a very, very marvelous process. I love it. I think you have a great job.
More
Hopefully.
questions? At the back there, at the very back.
Thank you for coming. And this is the frame from Wings and Desire. I would like you to just watch at the photo. I'll describe the frame. There is the Dashiell, the angel, and Omer, one of these proteges. They're walking by the wall, the Berlin Wall. And if you look at the wall, there is 3 numbers. Sorry, Bim, would you please look at the wall in the frame? At the very top, there is a few numbers. It is 17600 Figueras. Do you know what that means?
Is it your postal
no,
code?
It's more poetic than that. 17600 is the zip code of the city of Figueras in the Catalan country, here, very, very near from here. It's a famous city because Salvador Dalí was born there. And it really captured my attention, one of those many times I saw the film, because I was thinking who this Catalan would be. Who would be the person who wanted his city up in the wall in Berlin? Besides that, you know, Dalí
I guess it was
has
the
been-
nephew of Salvador Dali.
Besides that, you know, Dalí has painted so many angels, even made his wife a virgin. So maybe I thought, there is an angel waiting for you there. Would you be willing to explore the city? That's the question. Thank you very much.
Figueras. You convinced me.
Okay. So not intentional then.
So actually, I must admit, I never knew what it meant. There's a lot of graffiti on the Berlin Wall, and I deciphered a lot, But this one I never knew. It must have meant something to somebody. But I'm so glad you're finally telling me.
Okay, I think we have time for a couple more questions. One over here and one over there at the back. So shall we start with this one? And
Hello.
you never know.
Yes, okay. Continue with your questions.
So,
Here. Hello.
could you stand up, please? We cannot see you.
Here. Oh, okay.
Okay.
Hello, Wim. It's a pleasure to listen to you. And my question concerns your relation with Harry Dean Stanton, because when I saw Paris, Texas for the first time, it really didn't feel like he was acting. It really felt like he was just being himself. He was really, every reaction, every gesture was absolutely genuine. So could you explore, for an actor to feel so comfortable filming a movie and in a movie set, he must have some kind of special relationship with the director. And could you explore a bit the depth of your relation with Harry Dean Stanton, which can provide some of the keys to his amazing performance? Thank you.
I can. Should I? For a very long time, for a very, very long time, my main job between Harry and me was I was his therapist. Because Harry was so scared every day that he was not up to the part, that he was way too old to be the husband of this beautiful young woman, Nastasia, that he was too old and too ugly and too bad an actor. I had to hold Harry's hand every night, and I had to tell him how good he was. And I spent hours soothing him and telling him, Harry, you're the right man to this. It's you I wanted. Forget it. Nobody will think Nastasia is too beautiful to ever have been your wife. Forget it. You have to act that man, and you do it, and people will believe it. But Harry, every day, I had to hold his hand. Harry was so nervous and so little self-confidence. And even when we went to Cannes, the film was finished, he'd seen it, he was proud of it. Even when we went to Cannes, Harry said, Wim, I'm not coming. People will hate me. They will really realize how beautiful Nastasia is and what an ugly son of a bitch I am. I said, Harry, when we go to Cannes, I cannot hold your hand. If you want, choose a friend that you can take who plays your therapist, and then you come with us. And he said, okay, that's the deal. Do you pay for his ticket? I said, yes. And then Harry came to the airport and in the company of a very young, unknown actor. And that actor was at his side for the entire duration of the festival. That actor was always with him. When Harry did interviews or photo shoot, he was always standing on his side and building him up. You don't know who that was. It was Sean Penn. God bless his soul. Thank you.
We have time for a very, very short question. If it's not involving postal codes, better, so we can move on fast because we have to wrap up.
I had a question concerning your work that you did with Robbie Muller, the cinematographer. How was it to work with him, and how do you think working with a different one, like a different cinematographer, changes the result of the film?
Robbie Muller? Yeah. Robbie and I started together. The very first real movie with a real camera I made was shot by Robbie, and it was a short film called Alabama. I did not know any cinematographers. I was in film school. I had worked as a cameraman myself on all my films. I had also shot some of my colleagues, my fellow students' films as a cinematographer or cameraman. Most of them shot their movies on my little Bolex that I owned. So, and I didn't rent it. I said, if you want to have it, I use it, and you tell me what you want me to shoot. So I became everybody's cameraman, but I didn't know any real cameraman. And in my second year of studies, in 1968, I became an extra in a movie. I actually made more money than I'd ever made before in my life for acting for 3 days and playing a 1968 rebel student. I had Jimi Hendrix hairs, I looked the part, and I played for 3 days in this movie by an American director shot in Munich. And I had a few lines, but not many things to do. So I had time in between to watch him shoot the movie, and I realized there was a guy who I thought was really interesting. It was not the cameraman. The cameraman was an old Dutch guy, very famous Dutch cinematographer. But he was old. I wasn't interested in old men. But his assistant was a young dude, and he was so cool. That was Robbie, and Robbie could full focus with one hand and with the other do a cigarette. Because he only smoked his self-made cigarettes. And I thought that was the greatest thing. Full focus, and he could even do the cigarette in his pocket. And then he pulled it out and had it hanging here until the scene was over and he could quickly light it. I thought this guy should shoot my next film. He knows how to overcome problems. And Robbie shot Alabama, which was also his first film as a director of photography. And we shot the next 12 films together. Until I worked in America, and Robbie couldn't because of union problems. And then we continued working again, and one of our greatest collaborations is shown here in the retrospective, Fino al fine del mundo. That was one of the last things we did together.
So thank you so much. Thank you for listening to this beautiful talk. Thank you.
Thank you.
An absolute pleasure.
Thank you for your patience. Thanks. Yes, thank you all so much. Figueres, huh? Okay. I got the message. Thank you very much for your patience. Bye-bye. Thank you.
Maybe I'll see you. Yeah.
See you tomorrow.
It was interesting and fun and everything. So wonderful.